Hi, I'm Dr. Gary Lieberman, and in this video we're going to explore the 5 major or most widely used network settings in VirtualBox. We'll be looking at host only, internal, bridged, NAT, and then something called NAT service, which within VirtualBox is called NAT Network. So we'll be looking at all 5 of these. So let's get started. Okay, let's bring up the documentation. And here are all of the networking modes available within VirtualBox. And you can see there's a lot more than what's in the chart. You can read this on your own. Just bring up the documentation from the help button, help menu on the VirtualBox, and you can read this yourself. And we'll go into and explain a little bit about what each one does. Let's shrink that down, open up VirtualBox. Now, for our 2 Ubuntu machines that we're going to use to demonstrate things today, you'll notice that each one defaults to NAT, and that's fine. And the way you access this is you open up Settings, you go to Network, and under the adapters. Now, adapter 1, you can enable it or disable it. That's a valid mode if you remember from the documentation. Disabled mode is that. So adapters 1, 2, and 3, you can have up to 4 network adapters. Adapter 1 is enabled and set to NAT, and this is where you would select the different modes that you want, and the first one we're going to explore is NAT. And then you have the advanced here where you can say a cable is connected or a cable is not connected. You can do port forwarding, and you can set a desired MAC address, right? You can change it in some cases to promiscuous mode and not promiscuous mode, and that's more of an advanced network setting, which I'm not going to explain right now. But if you're using Kali Linux and you're going to do some Wi-Fi attacking, you'll need to have a Wi-Fi NIC in a promiscuous mode. So, but that's again more advanced. So once we set it to NAT, we can say OK, and we can start up our Ubuntu VMs. Start them both up here. We can log in to this one. We can type. And we can log into this one. Now let me just make these a tad smaller. Okay. All right, open up the terminal. Open up the terminal. And here we're going to do an ifconfig-a, which tells us what our network looks like. I'm going to do the same in this one. Now, these are 2 separate VMs. And notice they have the same IP address, which is given from the DHCP server, but they are 2 very separate VMs. Now, if I open up a prompt window from my host, and this is from my host, I can do an IP config because my host is a Windows 11, so it's a different command for Linux than it is for Windows. And you'll see that my IP address is 192.168.168.52. And of course, I can get out to the internet and I can do all kinds of things with that. Ping 8.8.8.8, which is Google, and you can see that it's pinging out to the internet and all is well. Now, if you look here, you'll see that for NAT, it says that the VM can contact the host. So let's see if that works. I'm going to ping 192.168.168.52, which is my host. And see if I can see, and you see that I can ping the host. I'm going to do the same thing over there on the other one. 168.168.52, and you see that that VM can also ping the host. Now, let me see if I can ping the VM. So ping 10.0.2.15, and you'll see that I cannot ping the VM. So if we look at our chart, we say that with NAT, the VM can access the host network. The host can access the VM only when you set up port forwarding, which we're not going to do for here. And the VM cannot ping each other. These cannot ping each other. But the VM can access the LAN and get to the internet. So let's try that. Let's ping 8.8.8.8, which is Google. And you see that we can get out to the internet just dandy. And we can ping 8.8.8, and we can access the internet. So that essentially explains our NAT setting. Now we're going to explore host-only settings. For that, we need to show you a couple of different things. We need to come over here and look at the network settings. And here you'll see that there's a VirtualBox host-only adapter setting. Now if we look at the properties, oops, there's the properties on the bottom. You'll see that it's configured the adapter manually. The IP address, the gateway is 192.168.56.1. The net mask is 255.255.255.0, and that's our IP6 address there. Come over here to DHCP, you'll see that our starting range is 100. Server is 100. The starting range is 101 to 254. Now you could set up multiple host-only networks here, but every time you set up a host-only network, let me bring in my command prompt. You'll see my host machine here. If I do an ipconfig, you'll see that I have a VirtualBox network interface card virtually in my machine, and it has the IP address of 192.168.56.1. So every time you create a VirtualBox host-only network, you'll create another NIC in your host, a virtual NIC in your host. So to configure it, let's go over to the first Ubuntu server, and notice that it's configured for NAT. So we want to go in here and go to network, and we want, oh, it is host only, and Ethernet adapter. It's using this Ethernet adapter here. You see the VirtualBox host only Ethernet adapter, and that's the one it's using. It's using your NIC. Remember when we did the NAT, we were using this one here. So one thing I would recommend, if you've cloned your machines, always go down to here to the MAC address and select another random MAC address and click OK. We come over here and we configure this one, go to network, and we take that to host only, advanced, and let's generate another MAC address and say OK. The reason I'm doing that is if these were cloned, they might have the same identical MAC address, machine addressable code. And so you can't have two MAC addresses that are the same on a network. It screws things up, and that'll mess up your VirtualBox. So you won't get a proper DHCP address. All right, so let's start these up and see what we get. Open a terminal window in each one. And we'll do an IF fig-A, IF-A, whoops. And notice that we have an IP address of 192.168.56.103, and we have 102 over here. Now, they should be able to see each other. And they can. And let's do the same thing over here. Two. And you see that they can ping each other. Now let's bring our host window in here and see if we can ping them. 192.168.56.102. And you see that we can ping it from the host. And let's do 103. And of course, to prove it, we can ping the host. But notice that we won't be able to. Well, let me move this out of the way. We won't be able to get to the LAN or the internet, or the LAN can't get to it either. So, if we were to try to ping Google, we wouldn't be able to get to it. Or if we tried to ping 192.168.168.52, which is my host, we wouldn't be able to get to that either, but we can get to that host adapter by pinging 192.168.56.1, and you see that we are going up into the adapter. Which is right here. We are getting up into the host, into the virtual network card. So that's what we use that for, host only, so that the host machine can get to each of the VMs, and the VMs can get to each other, but the VMs can't get out to the host. So that protects the host. And that allows you to do some experimenting with some malware or some infected processes and so on. The next networking mode we're going to look at is internal. And for that, we need to shut down these two Ubuntu machines. We'll power them off. And we go to settings and go to network settings, and let's set this to internal network, and it defaults to that internal network, and we can create additional internal networks if we wanted to, but for now that'll be fine. We click OK, and we do the same setting for this guy here, and we go to internal. OK, and let's fire them both up. Now notice down here in the chart that internal, you won't be able to interface with the host, and the host won't be able to interface with the VM. They'll be able to talk to each other, and they won't be able to get to the LAN, and the LAN won't be able to get to them. So no internet connectivity. They'll talk to each other, but not to the host or from the host. So that means that they're not going to get a DHCP address. And you'll see that when we do the IF config in both of them, they won't have any IP address. Open the terminal window here. IF config-A, and you'll see that there is no IP address assigned. We'll do the same here. Okay, So we're going to have to assign a static IP address. And to do that, we come here and say wire connecting, settings. And we can just wiggle that a little bit to shrink it down. And we want to go in here and say IP4. And notice to set the DHCP, but we're not seeing a DHCP server because remember we can't get to the host. And the host would have the DHCP service on it. So we're going to have to set it manually. So let's do 172.16.20.10 with a net mask of 255.255, 255.0, and we'll say 172.16.20.1. Now the 172.16.20 subnet is a non-routable subnet, just like the 192.168.168 subnet is as well. So you can safely use that. You won't interfere with anything out on the internet. So let's apply that. And we're going to have to down the NIC and turn it back on again. And now let's do this IP config again, and notice that we now have an IP address. Let's go do the same thing over on this side and go to settings and wiggle this thing so it shrinks down, edit, IP4, manual, and 172.16.20.11, 255, 255, 255.0, 172.16.20.1, and apply, down the NIC, start it up again, and let's do your IF config, and you'll see that we have that IP address. Now if we were to ping 172.16.20.10, you'll see that we can talk to each other. And we'll ping 172.16.20.11. And you see that the two VMs are talking to each other. But we won't be able to get out to the internet, or the host won't be able to ping either one of these. If I were to try that, ping 172.16.20.10, you'll see that it will fail because they're fairly isolated. So using the internal, whoops, I didn't do that. Using the internal setting allows the two VMs to talk to each other, but you'll notice that they can't talk to anything else. So that's good for some experimenting where you want to really keep the VMs isolated. The last network mode that I'm going to go over is called bridged mode. And you can see from the chart below that it basically allows pretty much communication any which way. From the host to the VM, from the VM to the host, between the VMs, from the VM to the LAN, and from the LAN to the VM. So pretty much wide open networking. Something you wouldn't want to use if you're going to be dissecting viruses and malware. You certainly don't want to, you want to use a very closed network. But this gives you pretty much open. So let's go about setting it up. We edit the settings and go to network. And here we select bridged. It's the second one down. And over here we do the same for the other Ubuntu. Bridged. And let's start them both up. Okay, so now that we're fired up here, let's open a terminal window. And while that's going, let me show you what the network connection looks like. We're back to our standard default automatic DHCP, automatic DNS, and so on. So we're back to our standard. And let's do it ifconfig-a. Whoops. ifconfig-a. And you notice that we have an IP address that's in the same range as our host. Oops. And you notice our host is 52, we're 145, and this guy over here will be 158. Now, I can ping 192.168.168.158, and you'll see that that works. I can ping 192.168.168.52. 168. Oh, come on. If I could type 168.168.52, and you'll see that I can get to the host can get to the VMs, and the VMs can get to each other. So it's pretty much wide open networking. Again, you wouldn't want to use this if you're testing some malware, but it certainly does make it easy if you're doing some of your assignments this way. That's the bridged mode. Okay, to explore the NAT service, also known as NAT Network, the first thing we have to do is bring up our VirtualBox, and we have to go to the Tools menu. We want to go to Networks, and we have our host only here that we saw before. We want to go on to the NAT Networks tab, and notice there's nothing here. We're going to have to create our first NAT network. So you say create, and it's going to give you an IP address 10.0.2.0, 255 IP addresses, and we want to make sure that DHCP is enabled, and that's all we really need to do at this point. So now we can start up our two Ubuntu boxes. Oh, no, we can't. We got to do this settings first. We go in here to Network, and we want to change that to NAT Network. And notice that our network that we've just created is there. We say OK. And we go into the second one, and we want to go to Network, and we want to go to NAT Network and pick that network as well. And then we can start these two up. You know what I forgot to do? One thing I forgot to do. I always want to do this. I want to go in and you want to pick a new MAC address. Anytime you play around with the networking, I like to pick a new MAC address just to play safe, especially if you're cloning something. So let's start them up. We'll give them a couple of seconds to start up. Now this is useful for when you want to create a network for your VMs where the VMs can see each other, but other VMs can't see them. So let's say the Ubuntu 2 was on a different VM, a different network, it would not be able to see these, but they'd be able to see each other. And I'll show you that in a couple of seconds after they boot up. Let me put my password in here, and let me do the same over here. So you'll also be able to see your host network as well. So let's open a terminal and do an ifconfig-a, and we'll do the same thing over here. Terminal ifconfig-a, and you'll see that we have a 10.0.2.6 and 10.0.2.5. So if we were to ping each other, 10.0.2.6, we'd be able to ping each other. And we'd also be able to ping our host network, 192.168, nope, 168.168.51, which is our host machine. And of course we can get out to the internet. Now I'm going to shut this down for a second, just to illustrate. That was the Ubuntu number 1. And I'm going to go in here to the settings, and I'm going to change that to a NAT, just plain ordinary NAT. Or better yet, let's go up here, and I'm going to create another NAT network. Create NAT Network 1, and NAT Network 1 will have the same IP address range, but they'll be unable to see each other. So let's go back to Ubuntu 1 and Settings, Network, and let's pick NAT Network 1. And let's do one more thing again. I want to redo the MAC address, and let's fire up Ubuntu 1. Meanwhile, we can kill that. And I'll do the IP config again. Now we'll let this start up. And once this starts up, I'm going to show you that Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2, even though they're on the same 10.0.2 network, that they won't be able to see each other. Okay, let's log in here. And open up a terminal and do our if config-a. And you'll see that we have 2.5 and we're 2.6 over here. So let's do this ping now. 10.0.2.6. And you see we're not able to ping it. And ping 10.0.2.5. This one was 5. Yep, that one was 5. And you see we're not able to ping it either. Destination will be unreachable. So they're isolated, but they're on their own private network. So we could put any number of VPNs on the NAT 1 and any number of VPNs on any number of VMs on the NAT, and they wouldn't be able to see each other, but they would all be able to get out to the internet. All right, so we could kill this and we could kill that, and that concludes our explanation of networks.